When I first heard that Janelle and Meri had finally gained legitimate ownership rights at Coyote Pass, I felt something powerful. Not just because the landscape of the Brown family had changed, but because of what this shift truly symbolized. Many creators have broken down the legal angles and property line changes, but I want to dive deeper. Why was this land so important? Why does ownership here carry such emotional weight? Let's start with Kody. I imagine when he heard the news, his reaction was one of disbelief and distress. There was probably real shock when it became clear, likely after a conversation with legal counsel, that he would no longer control the land he once saw as his future. His sense of identity, legacy, and authority may have felt like they were slipping away. And then there's Robyn. From the beginning, she and her children were closely tied to Coyote Pass. She saw it as a long-term investment, perhaps even a safeguard for the future. In my opinion, she viewed it less as a shared family project and more as something to secure. Whether for legacy, independence, or personal insurance, Robyn had a vested interest in this land that extended beyond sentiment. But for the rest of the family, the meaning shifted over time. Let's talk about Christine. For her, Coyote Pass came to represent everything she no longer wanted. The proximity, the constant reminders of being sidelined, it all became too much. Watching Kody give his energy to Robyn while only offering the bare minimum elsewhere wasn't something she could tolerate any longer. For her, leaving Coyote Pass was symbolic of reclaiming her voice and peace of mind. Now Meri's connection to the land is layered in hope and heartbreak. Coyote Pass symbolized a new beginning, an unspoken promise from Kody that she'd be welcomed back fully. But once she sold her Vegas home and gave up her stability, the promise faded. Coyote Pass became the last emotional chain linking her to a dream that had withered. Selling her stake isn't just a real estate move, it's a release. A final act of closure. Then there's Janelle. Of all the wives, she invested the most practically. Janelle worked hard. She paid bills, kept the lights on, and ensured the family had what they needed. She sacrificed time with her children, stability, and financial security for the greater good of the Brown family. She even dipped into her 401k to support the move to Las Vegas and the Arizona transition. But when everything crumbled, she was left with nothing tangible, no home, no assets in her name, and no financial cushion. A clip from Janelle once really hit home. She said, "After Kody left, I realized I had nothing. Everything I had was tied up in that land. I trusted this family structure, and now I'm stuck. I'm in my 50s, and I have to start over." That's not just a financial reality, it's an emotional one. Janelle was the bedrock of the family's finances, and to be left with so little was deeply unfair. So now we're here. The land is being divided, possibly sold, and the family that once dreamed of porches and grandchildren playing together is scattering. The vision is gone, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe holding on to something just because you've always held on is the real problem. Sometimes we don't let go because we still want something. We don't let go because we've forgotten how. That brings me to this. Have you ever stayed in a situation not because it was good or right, but because it was familiar? Because letting go felt harder than the discomfort of staying? For Meri and Janelle, gaining ownership and the freedom to move on may be their first true step toward independence in years. Their parting from Coyote Pass might not be the end of a dream, but the beginning of a new one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a Coyote Pass in your life, something you needed to let go of in order to truly move forward? Thanks for being here. I'm James, and this has been Sister Wives and Evil Views Update. Here's a stretch of rugged Arizona land nestled against the backdrop of mountains and dry brush. a place that once symbolized a dream. Coyote Pass. To some, it was just land. To others, it was a vision. But for Janelle and Meri Brown, it was much more. It was legacy. It was sacrifice. It was a chance to rewrite the ending of a long, complicated story. When the Brown family moved from Las Vegas to Flagstaff, they brought with them more than boxes and belongings. They brought hope that this new location would reunite the fraying bonds between wives and husband, children and parents, dreams and reality. But as the years unfolded, the dusty soil of Coyote Pass bore witness not to a great reunion, but to a great unraveling. For Meri, the land meant something deeply emotional. It was a promise, a chance to belong again. Her relationship with Kody had long since weathered many storms: distance, disconnect, and public scrutiny. The shift to Flagstaff had been pitched as a new beginning. Meri had sold her Las Vegas home with the understanding that this property would be the path back into the family, back into fellowship, back into Kody's heart. But the roots she tried to plant in that soil never took. Once the move was complete and the funds were collected, promises thinned out like desert rain. The warm welcomes and forward movement she'd been assured of didn't come. Instead, she found herself in a holding pattern, present but apart. Still loyal, but largely excluded. And so, Coyote Pass became a symbol. Not of reunion, but of waiting. Of hoping that somehow, someday, she would be welcomed fully again. Meri clung to that hope for years. But as time passed, the reality became clearer. The dream she had been sold wasn't materializing. Every delayed building plan, every silence, every empty assurance widened the emotional distance. And yet the land remained, unsold, undeveloped, untouched, a reminder of what could have been. When Meri finally gained clear ownership of part of Coyote Pass, it wasn't a victory. It was closure. Selling her share meant finally accepting what she had long resisted, that her place in the family would never be what it once was. Letting go of the land meant letting go of the maybe someday. For Meri, it was an emotional disentanglement. With it, she gained something more valuable than property: freedom. The freedom to forge a new identity, outside the shadows of a shared history that no longer served her. For Janelle, the meaning of Coyote Pass was different, more pragmatic, yet no less profound. Janelle had always been the backbone of the Brown family in a quiet, steadfast way. She wasn't the loudest voice, nor the most emotionally expressive. But she worked, and she provided. While others dreamed aloud, Janelle built. She paid bills. She showed up. Her contributions weren't always visible, but they were foundational. From early on, Janelle's income supported the collective family's needs. Mortgages, utilities, groceries. When others wanted, she gave. When funds were tight, she dug deeper. Her sacrifices were real, even when unacknowledged. When the family moved to Flagstaff, it was Janelle who again made practical choices. She cashed out her $401, giving up her future security to help finance the transition. She believed in the vision: multiple homes on a shared plot of land where everyone could live close but separately. It was the promise of balance, unity with space, individuality with community. But that balance never came. Plans to build kept getting delayed. Discussions about property lines turned into silent power plays. The shared vision became more abstract as Kody's attention became increasingly focused on a single household. And still, Janelle waited. She remained invested, emotionally and financially, even as her relationship with Kody became she would admit something that many viewers found heartbreaking. "I'm 50 years old and I have nothing." All the years of financial contribution, all the personal sacrifices, had left her tied up in a piece of land she couldn't live on. and a family dynamic that no longer included her. For Janelle, finally gaining recognized ownership in Coyote Pass wasn't about victory or pride. It was about justice. She had poured her life into this family structure. Ownership was a symbolic repayment, an acknowledgement that she mattered, that her sacrifices counted for something. And yet, like Meri, the ownership wasn't the end goal. Selling was. Because keeping a stake in that land meant staying attached to a broken structure, one that no longer made space for her. Letting go meant she could begin again. It meant financial independence, emotional closure, a chance to build something of her own with no strings attached. What made Coyote Pass so significant for both women was not the land itself, but what it represented. For Robyn and Kody, the land had come to represent control, something to be divided, claimed, and leveraged. For Meri and Janelle, it had come to represent entrapment. It was a tangible piece of an intangible history, full of promises, expectations, and silence. The kind of silence that accumulates over years, becoming heavier than words. In many ways, selling Coyote Pass was the final chapter in a story that began long before Flagstaff. It was the punctuation mark on a sentence that had dragged on far too long. It was the quiet revolution of two women who realized they didn't have to keep waiting for a seat at a table that no longer had room. And while Christine had already forged her own path, leaving the land behind with less complication, Janelle and Meri's journey was different. They had been the ones to stay, to hope, to give again and again. And so for them, selling was not just a business decision. It was an act of reclaiming themselves. There's a saying that goes, "You can't start the next chapter if you keep rereading the last one." That's what Coyote Pass had become, a chapter that needed to be closed. Not with resentment, but with peace. Now, as Janelle and Meri each look toward their next chapters, whether in business, relationships, or simply in personal healing, they do so with lighter hearts, because they are no longer tied to land that bound them to the past. Coyote Pass, in the end, didn't become the dream the Browns once envisioned. It didn't become a compound or a legacy property, but it became something else, an awakening, a mirror, a line in the sand that allowed Meri and Janelle to finally step out of waiting and into living. The dust may still blow across that Arizona landscape, but for two women who gave everything they had, it no longer clings to their feet. They walk freely now, into new beginnings, new possibilities, and new identities unbound by someone else's dream. And in that freedom, they found what Coyote Pass never could give them: home.